What up, guys? The Bench Buddies are back with our Week 19 preview and picks. Obviously, a big video as we're breaking down the final four games here of the college football playoff, and obviously all the bowl games that go with it. But before we do, we got to look at last week's results. And, I think this is the big stretch where you don't really know what you're getting out of these teams because there's so many games in a short time frame. Obviously, I want to sit 7-5, Ty going 6-6, and I think that's kind of good at this point in bowl season, especially with a lot of these teams that are around that 500 to 8-4 range. The biggest takeaway here of all these games, got to obviously bring it up the Cam Ward situation for Miami. He was playing great in the first half, then all of a sudden, yeah, I'm not going to play. I'm going pro now, and I think that's worse than just not playing in the bowl game. It's selfish. It doesn't look good for a team aspect, and if I'm an NFL team, I don't want this guy going out here like, oh, I'm just playing for me, and I don't really care about the end result of the game. Obviously, I want to win, but if you're healthy and you can play, at least play in it. Obviously, as a result, Iowa State wins that game after they were down at halftime, come back, win it late. And if Cam Ward's out there, I don't know if that's the case.
Yeah, I agree completely. I feel like a boomer nowadays having takes like this, but I think we talked about it before. It would have been a better look, in my opinion, to just sit out of the game. Go get your money, whatever you got to do. But when you put your body on the line and it comes out that it was just for yourself and not for your team, because it was a 31-28 game. This was a really good game at halftime, and you pull yourself out of the game, your team loses by one. I just think that's kind of a bad look. I know some people disagree, but not a great look. But as for the picks, I think this just shows how unpredictable bowl season can be. A lot of these games that we both lost could have went the other direction very easily with one play. So it just shows how tough it is to pick these games.
Yeah, and then obviously you can see it here as well in the last four games we picked. Obviously, the Army one was probably the only game that we for sure got right, and that Colorado game was the one that we probably is our biggest miss this bowl season so far. Obviously, they just did not show up, but we'll move on to this week. Iowa, Mizzou should be a decent game, a low-scoring game. I like Missouri in that. Obviously, I'm going with Michigan. I'm going to go with Washington, and I'm going with South Carolina over Illinois. I think that Citrus Bowl is going to be a very good game because people overlooked Illinois all year. I know that they didn't really play anybody really tough, but 9-3 for them is very good for them. And then South Carolina, a team that just missed out on the playoffs, has something to prove this year, and I think South Carolina is going to get that win.
Yeah, I think Missouri wins a really ugly game. I think this will be one of the least appealing games of bowl season, very low scoring. Michigan, as you can see, big bias pick there. But if they can stop the run, I think their secondary has everyone playing so they can hold up. It's just a matter of if their depth is good enough on defense to stop the run. I'm going Louisville in a close game over Washington. And South Carolina, I think, is going to win pretty easily over Illinois. I think they're still playing with a chip on their shoulder, not making the playoff, especially after watching that first round. So I think they go out there and dominate that game.
And also on New Year's Eve, and then moving to Friday, I'm going with LSU. I think the Tigers are going to win a good bowl game there. Top off Brian Kelly's, kind of disappointing year with at least a good end. Ole Miss, Texas State, and Minnesota are at least a touchdown or more favorites. So that's where I'm leaning.
Yeah, I think I'm just going Baylor due to players sitting out for LSU. You saw it yesterday with Miami and Iowa State. Miami was the better team, but Iowa State had more players available and just flat out wanted it more. And sometimes that's the difference. So I think that will be the difference here with Baylor. And then Ole Miss, Minnesota, and Texas State, like you said, all big favorites, and I think they live up to that and get the win.
Then the last game before we get to the playoffs, Buffalo, Liberty. Liberty was a team coming into the year that looked really good. Obviously, their quarterback situation and everything there. They were a team that probably was going to be that playoff team from a non-Power Four school. Fortunately, didn't go their way. They find themselves here in the Bahamas Bowl against Buffalo, and if that's the case. I like the MAC schools in these kind of games because they're just playing to represent the conference at this point.
Yeah, I'm going with the MAC as well. Liberty was like the worst, whatever they were, 7-0, 8-0. They were the worst undefeated team I've ever seen, and they showed when they lost to Kennesaw State and then just kind of fell off a cliff the rest of the season. Kane Salter, their starting quarterback, is transferring, so I'm sure he's not going to play in this game. And that's all you really need to know. I think Buffalo gets the win.
Then moving to the first game on New Year's Eve, Penn State, Boise State. And yeah, that's correct. I'm going with the Broncos here. Neutral site. We've seen it before in the Fiesta Bowl, how Boise State plays. This team is resilient. As long as Genty's healthy, I think they can give Penn State a run for their money. Expect a low-scoring game if what I say is going to be true. I think Boise State would win that one, probably 24-21. But if Penn State, can get going early and take Genty and that offense out of the game, I think Penn State could run away with it, but I don't think that's going to be the case.
Yeah, I think both of these teams obviously are really going to want to run the ball first. I just think Penn State's front seven is as good as anyone in the country. I think their weakness on defense is defending the pass, but Boise State obviously leans very heavily on the run game. So I think that plays into Penn State's hands, and they win like a 24-10 type of game here, just how Penn State wants the game flow to go.
Then moving to New Year's Day, the first of three playoff games. You got Texas and Arizona State. And, why not go with Arizona State? I think this team is the great story of the playoff, besides obviously Boise State. And Texas, didn't, I mean, I guess they put up a lot of points against Clemson, but it wasn't like they really had to earn those points. It felt like it was just a little too easy at one point there during the game. At least the first half, it kind of seemed that way. And I just think Arizona State, they're ready. They're fully rested up for this moment, had more than enough time to game plan for whoever they were playing. And, one of these, I think it's one of those two teams, Boise State or Arizona State's going to pull off the upset. I just don't know which one, so I'm going with both for the picks, if I'm going to be honest.
Yeah, I think this one is a little different than the Penn State game. Texas is similar to Penn State in that they have a very good front seven, which doesn't play well into the hands of Arizona State with Cam Skattebo. But the Sun Devils, unlike Boise State, have a very capable quarterback in Sam Levitt. So I think they are going to be able to air it out a little bit. I just don't see them slowing down this Texas offense. I know Ewers has had his struggles every now and then late in the season, but I think this offense is going to be ready for the challenge, and I think Texas pulls away late.
And then the other game, the second game of the day, Ohio State, Oregon. Obviously, this is probably the biggest game of the three. Get a rematch of what we saw early this year in Eugene. Obviously, Oregon coming out on top. Will Howard just sliding, deciding to lose the game for him. And Ohio State's obviously looking for revenge here. Huge win over Tennessee. Wasn't even a contest. And Rose Bowl, it just seems like this is the perfect situation for this game. Obviously, a national championship game with these two would have been great as well. But I like Oregon here yet again to keep the undefeated season alive, move on to the Final Four. And I think if this is the case, Dylan Gabriel is going to have to have his best game as a collegiate athlete, and especially as an Oregon Duck here for them to get that win.
Yeah, I just am banking on the fact that you haven't seen a performance like Ohio State just put on twice in a row in big situations under Ryan Day. It just seems like, the 2022 playoff game against Georgia obviously was a great performance, but that was kind of a one and done for them. And they've just had in the 2020 game against Clemson, for another example, then they laid an egg in the national championship. So I think they're going to come back down to earth here, still be a very competitive game no matter what. But people look at the Oregon 1 point win at home and say, oh, well, now you got to play them at a neutral site, second time, so Ohio State's going to win. But a lot of things went against Oregon. Remember, one of their better receivers was very dumb and spit on a player, got kicked out of that game. They were missing a very good D lineman. So obviously, now they're a lot more healthy than they were in that game. And I think that's one of the big differences here. And Oregon beats Ohio State again.
And then the last playoff game, I am going to take Georgia to win, but obviously I'm rooting for Notre Dame being a Tennessee fan. And, why not? I think this Notre Dame team proved, it was a little shaky in there in the first quarter, early second, but Notre Dame really ran away with it. It was their game at home. And if they can play that kind of football, I think they can walk away with this victory. But something in me just says Georgia, they just don't lose these type of games. And I get they have a new quarterback, Beck's done for the year, declaring for the draft, but Gunnar Stockton, it's not like this dude's some no-star backup that we've never heard of. I mean, he's another five-star they're bringing in here. Obviously, the circumstances are different, starting a huge game, but we saw Nick Saban do it with Tua and Jalen Hurts, just throwing Tua in there and becoming a star. And obviously, to this day, now we know what Tua is. And I think if there's any team that can do a repeat performance of what Alabama did, it's Georgia.
Yeah, I think this will be a really competitive defensive battle. That low over under might even be too high for a game like this. Gunnar Stockton he seemed like more of a run first quarterback, similar to Riley Leonard. watching that SEC championship. If Carson Beck was playing, I would slightly lean Georgia. It'd be very close. But without him, I think it's just enough of a difference to move me the other direction and go Notre Dame. I know everyone looks at Notre Dame and oh, they lost to Northern Illinois. They can't win a big game. They get blown out. But this team just feels different ever since that game. Looked really good against Indiana, and I think they're poised to really rewrite some narratives here and get a big win.
That's going to be it for our picks and preview this week. Check back next week, see how we did, and obviously we'll be breaking down the last two games of the college football playoff. But until then, the Bench Buddies are out.